in fact, in the very beginning, when the EIDL loan was first launched, I think within the first couple of days, the SBA already had 700,000 inquiries. They had 32,000 loan applications, and they had a very limited amount of those actually processed. So they are growing with us to help with this national and even really international economic issue. There's also a change, if you're familiar with the SBA loan process, typically SBA loans like the SBA 7A loan goes directly through a bank. It is different with the EIDL loan. The EIDL loan actually goes directly to the SBA. So the SBA is literally underwriting all of these loans that go through the EIDL process. Now, if you think about this from a business perspective, you are taking SBA folks who are traditionally processing paperwork on loans to now asking them to underwrite loans. This was a big challenge for the SBA. They knew they had a gap, and they've actually brought in different partners now to help them with that process, because that is a dramatic change from what they're used to doing. So, needless to say, there was a lot of changes that occurred within the first couple of weeks of the EIDL loan process. There was a very detailed application form that was taking people hours. They had website crashes. Then they moved away. They shut down the website for an entire weekend, and then they brought in a partner to help them with the loan process. So now you'll see for the EIDL loan, it's much more simplified, but it all changed over a weekend. So if someone was out there advising a business owner on the old process, they needed to keep up to date on what the new process might look like. Then all of a sudden we had the PPP program as part of the CARES Act approved, and that was done on March 27th. And within a week, they wanted the banks to start processing the PPP loans. What we do know is that while PPP launched on April 3rd, the banks received their initial guidance for the PPP loans late on April 2nd. In fact, it was close to, it was in the evening on April 2nd. So it's taking banks a little while to catch up. We do understand that there will be further guidance coming out from the SBA, final guidance from the SBA that has not been received by these banks yet. So there's still a lot in motion. And I guess that is my moral of the story for this history slide, is I wanted you to have a little bit of a perspective of where we're coming from, but then the situation that we're dealing with right now, it's very, very fluid. But luckily, there are options available for business owners that are viable and that will truly help them get through this particular time of need. So let's talk a little bit about the EIDL program. The EIDL program is their loans to provide working capital to cover normal business obligations and operating expenses. So that's the true language coming out of the SBA. Now you can get, the small business owners can get up to $2 million of loan assistance, and the terms are either 15 or 30 years. The SBA does get to determine what the term of those loans are. Now, the good news for business owners is that there's no payments for the first 12 months. Interest rates are relatively low at the 3.75% interest rate, and then it's even lower for nonprofits at the 2.75 percentage points. So that is all pretty clear and straightforward. However, what's unclear at this moment in time is the payout times. So we are getting different guidance from the SBA and the Treasury on how long the payout times will be for business owners. Originally, they said that they were going to get the 10K advance within 3 days. Now that's looking like more 2 to 3 weeks. And then we are also hearing that there might be further delays on the EIDL program for payout times. And it's all really dependent on the Treasury and the SBA. As mentioned, the SBA is underwriting. The payments are coming directly from the Treasury. and the application is sent directly to the SBA. So that is a little bit in a nutshell about the EIDL overview. And let me go on to PPP because it is good to distinguish the two options. So PPP was passed under the CARES Act, as I mentioned earlier, and it's up to $10 million of loan assistance, but that amount is based off of your payroll, okay? So it takes your 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, and that's what's calculating the loan amount. So now that might seem very straightforward to a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the loan forgiveness piece of this program. Let me tell you that there's about 31 pages of details supporting the ins and outs of this particular program and how business owners can actually get the forgiveness on the back end. The application seems simple, and I will say this a lot. The application seems simple. Getting the forgiveness is not so simple. So another thing for business owners to realize is that they have a 2-year term on this loan, okay, if they have to pay back any of it, but there's no payments for the first 6 months. It is a 1% interest rate. This is one of those other things that changed. Originally, it was a 10-year loan at a 4% interest rate. Then it went to a 2-year loan at a 0.5 interest rate. And where they settled on 2 years at a 1% interest rate. So if you were talking to a bank, or if your suppliers were talking to a bank, they hopefully are getting the right information now, but there have been quite a bit of changes over the last week on that. Applications can be sent through any FDIC insured banking institution. So again, the SBA is varying from what they usually do. Usually a bank has to be approved by the SBA as a PLP lender. However, now because of our uncertainty and that the economic impact that this pandemic is having, they have loosened that to allow any FDIC insured banking institution process these applications. Now, what we're seeing in the marketplace is a little bit different. Some of the larger banks have halted receiving those applications. Some banks are only allowing their current customers to work with them. Some other banks, namely some local banks, are only allowing companies to work with them if they open a bank account. So not every single FDIC insured bank is actually participating. So that is something else that business owners are struggling with, because sometimes their own bank is not processing these loans and they need to find another lender to work with. Again, uncertain payout times for this offering. It's really dependent on the bank and the SBA and the Treasury to figure out how quickly they are paying out these loans. We're hearing that it's going to be 3 to 6 weeks before the payout is happening. So there's a deadline on this program too. You can apply until, or the companies that you're supporting can apply until June 30th. Whereas on the EIDL loan process, you can apply through the end of the year. The PPP program also has a caveat. While they've approved $349 billion for this program, they are saying that the latest one can apply is June 30th or until the money runs out. Now, the loan is forgivable. It might be forgivable. Think about this and advise your suppliers that this is indeed a loan. Whether you're hearing it on the news or hearing it differently from a bank, it is really good to understand and have other people understand that this is a loan. And you have to follow some very detailed guidance on being able to ensure yourself that it will be forgivable. So there is risk associated with this. It's not just free money that is being provided. It has been a shame. I've noticed some banks going out saying that it's free money to people. without educating behind the scene what it takes for a business owner to actually get forgivable funding. So that's PPP. So who qualifies? If you're talking to a supplier, how do you know who qualifies for this loan? Typically, the SBA has very detailed descriptions of who qualifies for an SBA 7A loan. They have loosened those restrictions quite a bit. So who qualifies? Non-public companies with under 500 employees. Okay, so if you have suppliers in your supply chain that meet that criteria, they can apply. Nonprofits can also apply. Independent contractors can apply. So both for the EIDL loan and for the PPP loan, although for PPP, you cannot start applying until April 10th if you're an independent contractor. Now, there are some caveats to this. So for instance, if you have a supplier who has had a prior bankruptcy on an SBA loan or an SBA loan that is currently in default, they will automatically be rejected for both loans. Now, there is some clarification on this next one. So for PPP, if you have a business owner who owns more than 20% of multiple companies outside of the hospitality and restaurant area, they can only apply to one PPP loan. So what does that look like? We have a local business here who in Las Vegas who has 27 locations in the Valley. They are not in the hospitality space. They are not in the restaurant space. So they have to pick one of their businesses to apply for the PPP loan at this time. We are hopeful that this is going to change. We are actively pursuing that change with the SBA, but because we believe that the PPP loan, the businesses aren't getting funding. It's really to pass along to their employees. That is the whole point. It's a paycheck protection program. In fact, for you to use the PPP loan, you have to only use it for payroll, mortgage interest, rents, utility payments, and any other interest that you might be paying on a loan at this moment in time. You can also use it to pay your benefit package as a business owner. But that is it. You cannot use it for other normal operating expenses. So for this restriction to be in play for the PPP loan seems kind of odd to us. So we're hopeful that that changes. But as it stands right now, if there's common ownership and you're not in hospitality, they're not in a restaurant business, they can only apply for one PPP loan. So pretty straightforward on the qualification side of things. So let's talk a little bit about how do you support your suppliers through this time of need. Now, we've been helping quite a bit of owners and also suppliers of maybe some of you on the phone today through HPP. Here's one thing that I want to make sure that is very clear. Suppliers coming to you saying that they're in economic trouble is probably not going to happen readily. Okay, we've talked to a lot of business owners. Some of the business owners that are taking out these loans are not, I mean, they've been impacted, but they're not in trouble. Other ones are in a bit of trouble right now, but they don't want to necessarily impact the relationship with all of you by telling you that. So for those who are taking the approach of let's wait and see with our suppliers, that might not be the best approach. These suppliers, depending on the industry that you are working in, they are hurting. A lot of their locations have either dramatically reduced the interactions with you, winning the RFPs from you, your spend is decreasing, or they're frankly just shut down. They do need help and they need understanding on these particular programs. So let's talk a little bit about the dynamics that are going on and how you can help your suppliers. First of all, banks are not accountable for reviewing the PPP applications for accuracy. Okay, it's clearly stated in the regs. The banks are there to provide capital. They are not there to review the applications for accuracy. So if you are advising suppliers right now, they need to know that they are accountable, solely accountable and responsible for getting their application right the first time. We have had multiple business owners approach us after they've already applied, and many of them have lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars because they did not apply correctly. It's particularly risky on the PPP program because if you apply incorrectly, you might not get all of the loan forgiven. So that's something when you're advising your suppliers, they really need to understand that. And unfortunately, it's not getting out there in the conversations enough that the borrower is ultimately solely responsible for the numbers that they're putting in on their application. Now, here's another interesting dynamic that's going on. Banks get paid on the PPP program. Any lender that's approved gets paid on the PPP program. They do not on the EIDL program. So what we've been seeing in the marketplace is that sometimes the business owners are walking into their bank for advice and they're only getting information on PPP. That might not be enough. EIDL is a great option to cover other operating expenses outside of payroll. It is a fantastic long-term option, but because there's this misalignment of incentives, sometimes the business owners are just not getting the full picture. So as you are going out and talking with your suppliers, please ensure that they understand that there are more options than just PPP. There's the EIDL program that is an option, and then there's multiple state offerings and even private market offerings that they could go after for help. It's just not the PPP program alone. Forgiveness is not clear on PPP. It needs to be understood so the entire amount can be forgiven. We do see a lot of marketing stuff going on right now where, like I mentioned earlier, this is free money, quote unquote. And the banks are so overwhelmed with applications at this point that there's not a lot of opportunity for education. So that, like I mentioned before, there's a 31-page document explaining all of the ins and outs of PPP that the banks are using and that we're using to understand how exactly companies need to go about getting forgiveness. I will give you an example here. Unemployment tax in or out of your payroll calculation. Your FICA in or out on your payroll calculation. So those in the regulations, it's not overly clear, and I can guarantee most business owners don't understand the answers to those questions. We get them a lot, but depending on how they're filling out the application, they might not fill it out. They might not purposely inflate their numbers and then get stuck with a 2-year loan at the end of it. So it's very important to understand that forgiveness needs to be understood by the business owner and that they need to put in their application right the first time. Advice is needed to select the correct program. I mean, this is not an easy situation for most business owners. Most business owners have never faced a time like this before, and what we don't want happening is a bunch of our suppliers going out of a business and having holes in our supply chain as a result. So luckily, about a week ago, we were the advice, the direction that we were getting told was that you can only apply for either PPP or EIDL. They have loosened that now. You can apply for both, but we need to make sure that your suppliers are aware that both programs are in existence and what they can and cannot be used for. Here is the bottom line. Once a loan application is submitted, changes cannot be made. So with your suppliers, as they're going about trying to get these loans processed as quickly as possible, accuracy and completeness and is just essential for the application process. What we don't want happening too is there's an incomplete application or an inaccurate application, and then the SBA or the bank kicks you out of queue that could add into the timing and the further delays of getting payments made on these loans to the businesses. So those are just simple things outside of just knowing what EIDL is and what PPP is, which I described earlier on. It's really good perspective for all of you to have as you are trying to guide your suppliers through this, that there are some dynamics going on in the industry right now, and it's really important for the business owners to be very well educated and getting that application right the first time, and then if they've applied for PPP, truly understanding what they need to do for forgiveness. So with that said, a little note about HPP. Now, we have programs for your suppliers that do not cost anything for suppliers. So, so we are here to help truly as many suppliers as we can get through this these economic times and this pandemic. So we, as I mentioned, we help suppliers get their applications done right the first time, and that they're properly prepared, accurate, and defensible. So the SBA might come back, the IRS might come back, the banks might come back with further questions, and we want to make sure that we have a very tight bow around this application up front the first time. The forms are simplified. I know several business owners are like, but the form is so easy. It has 2 questions. How can this be so difficult? Even on the EIDL program, it's not overly complicated up front for the application. What is complicated is the back end. So even for the EIDL program, we're getting told that someone might come back and ask for additional documentation, whether that's the SBA or the IRS eventually, or you could, on the PPP program, that could be the bank. So, so you really need to know the ins and outs and what the numbers entail as you're putting it on those applications. We gather all of the information up front to satisfy not only the application, but what you will ultimately need on the back end and what those business owners will need on the back end to justify and support their application. We do write written narratives at points in time. So there are a couple of companies where their numbers don't seem quite right, and but there's a real justification behind it. So we work with those business owners to summarize their operations and the financial impact that they've been having, so we have a more complete story to give the bank when they are applying to the PPP program. We also review every application and make recommendations, and ultimately what we want to do is improve accuracy of every single application that goes in. Now, we can't guarantee a loan approval because there are a lot of factors that go into that, but we do want to improve accuracy and speed for all of these business owners to get the funding out as quickly as we can to help save these businesses through this economic downturn. So with that said, I am going to take questions. That is all I had prepared today. I figured all of you would have a ton of questions that you might have about these programs, what you're hearing in the marketplace, what you would like to learn on behalf of your suppliers. So I'm going to go into the chat. And let's see. Okay, so there's a couple of questions about the 31-page PPP document. So that the interesting thing about the 31-page PPP document is that it's not final yet. So the final regulations are due any day now. What I would say is if you're advising a supplier on these particular loan options, that they need to have a conversation with their banker to understand those PPP regulations. I do not believe that they are publishing those 31 pages publicly at this moment in time. And I would say that if anyone's out there thinking they have final answers, they are incorrect. The final guidance is coming out hopefully either today or tomorrow. So for those who might have further questions, we can use the Q&A functionality on the Zoom meeting, or you can use the chat function. Either one will work. We're monitoring both of them. So Kathy, we did get a question, and it's not really related to the topic today, but you did get a couple of questions beforehand that I could answer if that's okay with you while we're waiting for.
Certainly.
Okay. So so there was a question about how do we prepare now for a role post-pandemic if we're looking for a role. So so I would say, first of all, attending webinars, the many wonderful webinars that Kathy and I were talking about earlier. I know she has one coming up this week about emotional intelligence. It's very important in these time of needs to continue to educate yourself, continue to develop yourself, and then also build your brand. So there's a ton of opportunity with technology these days, with sharing your thought leadership on LinkedIn, sharing videos on LinkedIn, continuing to network within groups, either like ISM New Jersey or other groups that might be available to you to prepare yourself for that next opportunity. I know there are so many looking for jobs right now, but how you stand out is how do you build out your brand and your thought leadership in procurement or supply chain to become recognized and known out in the industry. So that is my guidance. And I don't know, Kathy, if you have any further ones, that's great too. And then the other question was about remote work. So, it's an interesting one about, are we going to go back to normal in all cases, or there's going to be more remote work allowed moving forward? It'll be an interesting phenomenon to see, but where I'm thinking is we're going to settle on something that is a little bit in between. We will have certain jobs that absolutely go back to face-to-face, or we will have more flexibility to work remote in the future because we know now we can do it. But I think this is going to allow us to progress a little bit more towards remote work in most companies. So, because now it's proven, and it seems like it's working for the most part really well for most companies. So with that said, I don't know if we had any other questions. It would be interesting, and I would love to hear from all of you, and maybe you could chat back with me, but it would be interesting to understand, A, are you getting questions from your suppliers related to these programs? And B, where are they getting their information from? Because that is at the end of the day, what we want to prevent happening is suppliers going out of business, right? And when we all come back online fully, are we going to have fully intact supply chains to support us? So that really is, at the end of the day, the question. And I've heard, because I've talked to so many people in the industry, I've heard some people are, there's a lot of different resources available to these small business owners, but some of them are banks, some of them are diversity councils, others are yourselves. So if you're not hearing from your suppliers at this moment in time, again, I'll reiterate that I would not take a reactive approach to protect your suppliers and your supply chain. Being proactive in these times is something that I believe the suppliers will recognize as you move toward being a customer of choice for those suppliers, that they will appreciate the proactiveness and your ability to share resources and guidance to them. So I hope that helps out in the long run to keep your supply chains intact. So Kathy, I think we've been able to answer all of the questions, and I'm not sure if you had any other questions that you wanted to ask of me.
No, not at this time. If anybody does have a question for Amanda, now's the time. It looks like we have a question.
Yep, we just got one. So let's see. So Ryan,
Okay.
good question, Ryan. So Ryan asked, why would the banks not be responsible for reviewing the PPP applications when they're making money off of the program? Should we be steering companies toward another option? That's a really great point. So here, I think what is trying to occur, what they're trying to have happen here is they want the application process to be very simplified because they want to get the money in the hands of the business owners as quickly as possible. So that is something to keep in mind. That's why they've simplified the application process in general. But at the end of the day, the economics for the banks is not overly robust. They are getting paid a percentage point, a certain amount of percentage points off of the loan from the Treasury, but then they're not making much interest, and they're not able to charge other fees for these programs. So there's been a mixed bag of banks who are truly interested in this business. And being able to staff up in appropriate ways to support the amount of applications coming in. To your second point, should we be steering companies toward other options? I think that I know that both PPP and EIDL options are good options for business owners. I just think they need to be educated. They need to understand that both of these are loans, that they have an accountability on both of them, more so on the PPP program to get that application correct so that they could do the loan forgiveness. And then they need to know what they need to do on the forgiveness side of the PPP program. So it's not that either one of these are bad options. It's just that they need to understand what the nuances are behind the programs. So that is that's the closest answer that I can give you, Ryan. I agree that I was a little shocked that they're not accountable for reviewing the applications per the regulations. Now, I think some of the more conservative banks are reviewing the documentation, but not all. They don't need to, and they're not accountable to doing that. So any other questions? We'll pause.
Yeah, now's the time. We have Amanda's attention.
Yeah, so I will say, just as we're waiting for any other questions to come in, so we are offering live webinars Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time or 2 p.m. Eastern time. And as I mentioned, we have no cost options for your suppliers too if they are looking for our help. So our mission is to ensure that your supply chain stay intact and that the business owners come out understanding what loans they have now signed up for and how they can get the forgiveness on the PPP side. So I'm sure when Kathy, I think Kathy's planning on reaching out to you after this webinar, we will share that information, because if you are getting questions from your suppliers about these options, that would be a great way to spread the information to them.
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. This has been very valuable today. And I'm hoping that everybody else felt it was they found they got a lot of good information, on these two programs. It's, something I'm actually exploring myself as far as my company is as well. So this was very good information, because there's a lot of mixed messages out there. And, just what she said in the presentation, a lot of the information out there, it's not the full information, and a lot of people are starting to apply, and they may not be applying correctly,
right,
which will hurt them in the long run.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we don't want that. I mean, none of these businesses asked for this. It's not like they mismanaged their businesses, right? That's not the situation. So we were asked by the government to change our behaviors and change how we operate our businesses day in and day out. So the last thing that anyone wants is for these businesses to be impacted long term by something they thought was forgivable that's not, or they thought it was a different loan than it's not. So I truly hope that we can each help each other and help these businesses be successful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It looks like nobody has any more questions at this point, so we actually can end. Just one question for you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Would it be possible for you to send me the slides in case anybody would be interested in just having a copy of the slides?
Yep. And I will send you the webinar information too.
Okay.
So,
Thank you so much. That would
yeah.
be great.
Okay. Well,
I will.
I hope that everyone is being safe, being healthy, and then let us know if we can help in any way. We're here to provide that service to yourselves and to your suppliers in need. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I did want to let everybody know that if you are looking for some other resources, ISM New Jersey on their homepage does have a COVID-19 resource page for diverse suppliers and small businesses. If you need that information, we have it there. And I'll also be sending out some follow-up information that Amanda's providing to us, to everybody. And of course, I'll advertise our next webinar is going to be this Wednesday. It's going to be on generation gaps, and that's going to be with Matthew Bradshaw. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today, and we'll be emailing you shortly. Thank you very much, and thank you, Amanda.
You're
and
welcome.
please be safe out there. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.